right, it's December 9th, 2024. This is take 3, actually.
Oh, don't say that.
No, I made a joke that we filmed earlier, or we recorded an hour long, and then it didn't get recorded. So we're going to re-record.
Yes.
I'm here with Daniel Willis. Daniel, welcome to Boston.
Hey, thanks.
It's weird to say that twice. So I'll just start off by asking, what is your current work, and where can we find some of the work that you do, just to frame sort of who you are and what you're doing currently?
Yeah, I am a videographer and video editor, and I edit for different YouTube channels,
Including Sattler's.
Sattler.
Most important. I'm just kidding.
I used to do it for the Followers Way. They wanted it in-house just because there's people that wanted to do it. But for Strength to Strength, Sound Faith Music, Hope for Wandering Amish, All Nations Bible Translators, and a bunch of other YouTube channels on and off, like Kingdom Fellowship Weekends once a year. There's certain things that are just a few times a year. But it was my passion because it helped. Things like that, videos that I've seen online, brought me to a more obedient faith, following Christ, following the Sermon on the Mount and having a brotherhood and not being a lone ranger. It was something that's become very passionate to me. And so thankfully God gave me the ability to make it a job where I can feed my family by editing for these different faithful churches.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to have you here, because here we always record some things and they get sent off from the internet, and I know that you're doing a lot of it on the other end. But I'd love to launch with the typical, what's your condensed story? I know you could probably talk for a long time about your story, some bits of your testimony, some of your passions will probably come out through that. Can you condense that into
Yeah. Growing up, I wasn't in a normal Christian family. My dad was an alcoholic. My brothers were into drugs and selling drugs. I got a felony when I was 13, started fight clubs, sent people to the hospital, destroyed all kinds of properties, did all kinds of bad things, including literally planning to kill someone, and didn't do it, thankfully. And Christ got a hold of me through my football coach, invited me to go to the Starlight Crusade, a Baptist preaching event where they have all this entertainment for children and these bands, and then there's this hellfire and brimstone sermon, and I had just got a felony and knew that something was wrong. And the pastor, it felt like, was describing me and all the sins and these things that I could be free from. And I honestly do believe that after that baptism, God was working with me and guiding me. I wasn't perfect. I couldn't read. I didn't go to church afterwards. I didn't have a Bible. I wasn't capable of reading. I didn't read very well at all, I should say. My reading comprehension was very low. Was a bully. Then after I became a Christian, I knew that I was supposed to abstain from sexual relations and not do drugs. And I realized my bullying was not Christ-like. And so I started bullying the bullies. And what did you call it last?
Oh, vigilante.
Vigilante.
That's exactly,
yeah, what I did. And it wasn't good. It seemed good until when I turned 16 and started going to church, I realized a lot of the things that I thought were godly weren't godly. And my life changed a lot at that point. But they realized I had struggled reading, and they gave me an NLT, and I told them I was struggling reading that. Then when my elders gave me the Bible on CD, or somehow I got a hold of it, I'm pretty sure that's how it was. And then I just listened to it and read and listened to it. And it just became like my passion. It was like everything I wanted to do was consume the Bible. I carried it around high school. And I think everybody thought I was extremely weird because I went from this, jock beating up people to always talking about Jesus and giving people hugs and telling them that we actually have to live for Christ. Then went to Johnson University, met my wife, was called into missions work. And I had a triple major, missions, Bible, and ESL major. And then me and my wife we got that because we were planning to go to China, and I needed to know about missions and what not to do mostly. And then Yeah.
When you started, did you know you wanted to go to China? Not necessarily,
no. Yeah. So a lot of the people from these background churches maybe think of my story is a very evangelical kind of thing. When I was 13, actually, after I got the felony, I was sitting at a church after doing community service at that church. And I knew sitting there that I wasn't supposed to just be someone sitting there, that I was actually supposed to, I'd just been baptized and I was supposed to do something else. Like my imagination was to be a preacher, but I didn't want to, but like, I just had this like feeling I'm supposed to be preaching. And so I fought that feeling for a long time. And then at Johnson Bible College, at the Church of Christ that I went to before I went to Johnson Bible College, one of the sermons on Noah was making yourself available to God. And he taught us, like, when you hear missionaries preach or anything like that, make yourself available. Like, ask God if it's what he wants you to do or not. So I got to college and we had chapel every day. And during Wednesdays, we'd have missionaries, and one of the missionaries was from China. And I was actually working full time to pay for the college. And I was doing homework, and I shouldn't have been in chapel, but I was trying to get homework done that was due. And then after his message, I said, God, is this what you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? Kind of a habitual thing. And then I got chills all over my body. And I was like, God, I don't want an answer from chills. And I just want to know, is this what you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? And they increased, and then asked again. And then I had no idea what China was like. All I knew is everybody was kung fu artists and great at ping pong and really short and starving. And none of that is really true. And then I started crying and was like, okay, I'll go. And then literally after that, he literally answered my prayer and let me know I'm supposed to go to China. And so I switched my major from preaching to missions. And then I realized when you go to China, you have to get a visa and you can't just go. And so then I had to figure out how to get in there. So to change my major, added a major. Anyway, then we get to China. Is there anything you want to interject? Okay. And there's a lot that happened before the first church plant, but we had a church plant that I did with a Baptist pastor, because all the other missionaries were kind of, at least to us, seemed very afraid to do anything because of the potential risks and getting kicked out and who knows what. But this Baptist guy was not afraid, and I was really excited to see someone else that wanted to try to do that. So I started working with him, and as we're planning this church and reaching out and finding people and bringing people to Christ, I realized like half of his sermons literally were sending me to hell. He would say something in a sermon like, if you believe this way, you're going to hell. If you believe baptism does anything to save you or wash away your sins, you're going to hell. If you believe you can please the Lord, he equated it to works righteousness, as if you were trying to work, which I didn't believe you can earn your salvation, but I believed we can please the Lord. And anyway, and he would say, those things made me really start to question my faith, especially whenever he had a different opinion on modesty and women's roles in the church and the headship order. And as I studied those things, I realized I was wrong about a lot of the things he preached on, and he was right. But I still thought he was wrong about a lot of the other things. And as I dug into these matters, I realized there's so much more I didn't know. And we were going to a international church at the same time. And I was getting confronted by Calvinists and Pentecostals and all kinds of different missionaries. So I was the only missionary that had this like Church of Christ kind of mindset. And actually we all got along, but none of us really saw eye to eye at the same time. And so it made me, I hadn't experienced that in my Christian life that much until this point. And so it made me really dig in and try to figure out what the truth was. And we started a second church plant. We moved out of the city and further out of the city where we didn't know missionaries were living. And we tried to start one there. And then I realized I was really afraid to teach at this moment, because everything that I had learned, I don't know how much of it was the truth, because I was discovering all kinds of things that I was doing wrong and that I taught that was wrong. And then we just decided we're going to read all the way through there's teacher that said the best way to read all the scriptures is when you start a book, read it from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And so we found Chinese people willing to do that, and we started doing that on Thursdays. And there, I would ask questions like, what does this mean about God? What does it mean about man? And if it's true, what are we supposed to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And their answers were just so simple and pure. And they would see things that were obviously written there, but because of the perspective that was given to me, I didn't see it. And things like, no matter what, in all things, don't complain or argue. And I took it so serious that really, I had always been in churches where people complain and argue.
And you were telling me earlier, this is like people interacting with the scriptures for the first time.
Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah. Yeah. Like, there's a few ladies that were, had gone to the Three Self Church, which is a government church, but they couldn't read. And the Three Self Church I'm not going to get into that. It's just not a good thing most of the time. Every once in a while you find one that's decent, but they rotate the leaders, and half of them are Communist Party officials and don't believe in Christ at all. And they're teaching, for trying to make Christians like uphold to the Communist Party's, thoughts or whatever. But they couldn't read, and sometimes we just read out loud, but then we realized on the longer books like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and some of the Old Testament books, it was easier to just play the audio and all of us follow along. And it just became so real to them. Like after Matthew was the first one, they all wanted to stick around and read Luke. And it was like 1:00 in the morning. And I was like, yeah, I got to go home. My wife's at home and I got work tomorrow. And, but they were so excited to hear the word of God. And through that, when we got to Corinthians, all the ladies asked me about the head covering. And I first brushed it off and just said, oh, it's the prostitutes or it's the long hair. And then I got home and I was like, how could it be both? Like if it's the long hair, then it wouldn't have been the prostitutes. In my mind, it was just made up because it is the long hair and because of the prostitutes in Corinth. And then I started searching it. Then my wife ends up asking me about it, and I didn't bring it up to her. And she had been reading because we were at that. She knew what we were going to be reading that night, and she wasn't there. And then eventually I said, you just need to read it and, make up your mind on it. And because we had already gone on this journey and started changing everything to almost the most literal version of what scripture is, the most simple understanding of it. And she came out of the room one day, a few days later, with a beanie on her head, and I never seen her wear it in this house. And so I was like, is this it? And she was like, yeah, it let's do this. And we discussed it, like maybe in the future, if we found out we're wrong, she'll stop wearing head coverings. And then we started to try to figure out at that point, were we some weird cult? Like, we don't know anybody in the world who wears head coverings, never heard of it except in college when they were telling us why it was only for that time back then. And then we couldn't find people who were non-resistant. And well, anyway, that was later. When we found that there were other people online, we found Followers of the Way and Kingdom Fellowship Weekend. And there's two sermons that were hugely impactful. One was first of all, I kept showing, pausing it every time someone in the crowd was wearing a head cover. I was like, Casey, look. And like, then there's a sermon, Casey was at work and is Give Me Children or Die, I think is the name. And I don't even remember what he said at this point, but I know that it affected me to where when my wife got home from work, I was like, you need to not be working. You need to spending time with the children and raising your children. And so then we had to kind of adjust our life to one less income. And, but it was 10 times more blessings. And I mean, it's just what we needed. And then the other one was the just war debate. Like the second we heard Dean and David, especially Dean Taylor, when he talked about, did Jesus really mean everything he said? And can you follow Christ without following Christ?
Right.
And those things just rang so true. And then the whole argument of the just war debate made me instantly connect a bunch of dots and realize that we are supposed to be non-resistant. We are supposed to love our enemies, even if it means dying and being killed by our enemies instead of fighting and killing back. And it just was a really foreign thing that made all the scriptures start to make sense. And I mean, not just that, but there were so many weird things that I still didn't understand, because how can it be Jesus's teachings and, fight and whatever? We were chased out of China, basically. And when we got to the States, we moved up to Pennsylvania. We called to follow Matthew Miliani. He said, check out KFW and see what it's all about. And so we went to KFW and eventually joined Chambersburg Christian Fellowship. That's kind of how we got here.
Well, yeah, again, I feel like we could go in 90 different directions, but we'll trace the ones that we've talked about a little bit more. We were talking a little bit about like the number of denominations out there. I mentioned that if you do a quick search, it's either 30, 40, 50,000 different denominations. And I actually think that's a really intimidating number for the present time, for our children, for college students on, hey, how do you discern what is truth when there are so many competing truths? And I think in a certain point, there will always be certain differences that exist that are okay. But how do you think about like how do you test some of these denominations and pursue truth, or what's been helpful to you in your life? We already chatted about it a little bit before, but
yeah. So it was a huge question of mine. That question is what came up when I was surrounded by these missionaries who all believe something different. And I'm sitting there thinking, how can one of these has to be true or none of them? But they can't all be true because they're all conflicting with each other. And so I actually didn't have a ton of peace about it, even when we were on the journey, just following what we can simply see in the scriptures. Because what if we were wrong? And so when moving to Chambersburg, I didn't really know about this thing that we now call the historic faith. And it's the faith that in Jude that was once delivered to all the saints. And it was a complete faith that we were supposed to contend earnestly for. And if it was handed to the saints, who are these saints? And whenever I not discovered like I was out hunting for them, but whenever people mentioned the early Christians, and reading that all these early Christians came to the same conclusions of whenever you follow it simply, you are non-resistance. You do die for your enemies instead of fight. You'd rather be stolen from and to give instead of receive. I mean, every single doctrine that is hard to swallow, that most denominations would just twist to make it more comfortable for themselves, or even make it the opposite. They actually believe just literally and simply. And it is crazy to me that they got so many followers with how, from the outside looking in, it is a high cost compared to, there is no cost almost in the save me gospel. I accept Christ so that I can be forgiven, and then nothing changes. Right? It's like there's cost, and anyway, the early church is what gave me peace about it, because it was the apostles handing this down to saints, and they all understood the Sermon on the Mount for today, and as a literal teaching, they all understood the gospel message as simply obeying basically everything in there without twisting it. And the head covering, and I mean, you name a hard teaching,
Yeah, and I think earlier there's this, whenever you talk about the early church, I think you have to be really, there's some amazing things, and then there's some like warnings
yeah,
to put in. And I think if people first start reading XYZ author, usually you read something that's like, well, that is coming out of left field.
Yeah.
We were talking, I'd love to, do you have any examples that come to your mind on, hey, when is the early church useful? And are you still allowed to read them, even though some of their writings might seem pretty far out? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of things that will make a modern day Christian cringe. There's a lot of things that are hard to swallow that are actually important things. But then there's things that are like Clement of Alexandria, when he talks about food and sauces. Like when I read it, I was like, I love ketchup and mustard and mayonnaise and ranch. And he's like saying run away and don't he's like talking about the sauces like they're evil. But then if you keep reading, he eventually is saying that's because people are chasing these things all around the world, looking for all the perfect ingredients and spending all their time and money to make this one sauce that they basically worship. And it wasn't like just going to your local store and grabbing a sauce and for your whatever. And then the other thing was like hot showers. I remember reading he was saying we shouldn't get hot showers, and I was thinking like, what's the problem? But in the context back then, and they didn't have water heaters, you just plug in the wall, and 20 minutes later have a hot shower. They would spend half a day or quarter of the day boiling water with a servant normally so that they can be comforted for a little bit of time. And I'm not saying that it was completely, but he wouldn't have been dogmatic. And it wasn't like all the early Christians saw these exact, if all of the early Christians would have been talking about these things, then maybe it would have merit, but it wasn't. It's like this one guy and a very godly guy at that, who I would say is very credible. But pointing out something that he probably witnessed some of his church, the people in his church, spending too much money and for something that, wasn't exactly needed, or chasing sauces around the world. But some things that are also hard to swallow that are very important is they would have read the Septuagint, for example, and they wouldn't have. And nowadays, not long ago, I was lifelong friends basically won't talk to us because we read the Septuagint. No other reason. And it went from Luther saying it was edifying but not scripture, and then a bunch of people, including Jesus and others, who quote it in our scriptures, and the early Christians reading it and following it and quoting from it through most of history until pretty recently. And now friends are like, that opened my eyes that, okay, the Septuagint isn't some evil thing. And actually, just recently, somehow people have been convinced that we shouldn't read the Septuagint, and it's wrong.
And the Septuagint is just a Greek translation of the Hebrew text plus a few other things. Yeah. And so I met your family this morning, and one of your sons' name is Ignatius, and I'm not the expert on the early Christian writers, but they've obviously meant a lot to you, enough that you would name one of your sons after them. But if you're trying to get started on, hey, how do I even poke around at these resources? Do you have any recommendations on a good place to start for anybody that's kind of interested? And
yeah, well, first of all, the early Christians are absolutely not scripture. They are fallible men who are really, really intelligent, and who really, you could tell that they spend their life consuming the scripture. It seems like they have so much memorized and just quote left and right without references, and it's just, they put a lot of us, or maybe most of us, to shame. But they're absolutely fallible, and not that they have all these things that we can't listen to, but they're not the scriptures. But there's a few places. One, I really enjoyed John Chrysostom. He resonates with me. I don't know if he does with others. He's a little bit past the first 300 years of Christianity, but he seems to be in line with it. But also, we have the Historic Faith online resources that you could also go and see what the early Christians said about lots of different
Right.
topics that would kind of introduce you into, to get your feet wet to see
Right.
what they believed.
And you're even saying that most of them, the most quoted passages come from Matthew 5-7 in the Sermon on the Mount. That was like there's they put a lot of attention onto that.
If you don't know if we should be following the Sermon on the Mount today, and you read, if you go get the book called Early Christian Commentary on the Sermon on the Mount by Elliot Nash, it doesn't have his own words. I do think he made it more modern English, but that was it. And it goes from the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, and just goes like, if it's a Beatitudes, he just puts all the quotes about the Beatitudes and what they believed about it. And it's a really thick book, and it seems definitely, in my opinion, that has to be the thing they wrote about most, right? And it obviously was, and they call it the law, like the new law that we're supposed to be following. And we have a king,
the new Moses,
the
new Moses, yeah. And I think just that I'm not really sure. I've spoken to a lot of people about this idea of developing just this almost like an insatiable hunger for truth, that you're willing to engage with new things kind of continuously. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on like how do you develop that kind of hunger for truth that's still open to new things? Because you know what I'm trying to say, where all of us have changed over time in our testimony. So how do we disciple and raise people where they're becoming convinced of truth, but in a certain way still open to have new information come in as they encounter new stuff to shape their beliefs? How do you set like the right guardrails around that? Or is it just going to be a sort of a lifelong pursuit?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that whatever denomination you're a part of, you're going to be on guard and try to keep other things out. And the people from that denomination would probably not want their followers to be open to new things. The problem is there are the 44 or whatever thousand denominations, and the question is how do we know what's true? I don't have peace with just, how do I say this? So when you have a whole denomination based on someone who was from the 1800s or the 1500s, and it never was anything before that, we should know our history.
Right.
And I'm not answering your question very well.
No, I think
I did have a reason to go through the episode, but
I think part of it's more of me just making a comment with a question, is that somehow we want to. There's a quote that by a guy named Balthazar Hubmaier. I actually brought him up earlier, that truth is unkillable, and that should be really refreshing for Christians. It's like, you can discover this truth. It kind of ties to some of what you're saying. However, it's really hard to know when we've arrived versus when we need to keep looking.
I have actually something really good, two things about that. So have you seen that there's a short that I saw one time, and it was some soccer chant, and they'd put the words on the screen of what it sounded like. And one of them was like, "That is embarrassing." Have you heard that?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And it goes through, and it's like whatever they put on the screen, you heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like a lot of the denominations that we're in, we're given a lens, and then we read. We're given what it's supposed to mean, and then we read something that could literally be saying the opposite, but we're reading what we think it's supposed to mean because it was put on the screen. We're hearing that is embarrassing when it's some other language, some other chant, and somehow we're programmed into seeing these things. And another example is not long ago, and I walked outside after filming something, and me and my son walked straight to our car, and there's this Hispanic man just digging in our car, and he grabs something out and puts it in his pocket. And I was like, I'd really appreciate it if whatever you took out of there, you'd give to me. And he's like looking so guilty at me. And he's like just looked, and I'm like, I'd really appreciate it. I said it again. And then he kind of walked by me, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And I was opened the door to get in the car, and he like pushed the door, and I'm like, what is going on here? And then Chantel, who's still here, she was there, and she goes, hey, Dan, is that your car over there? I looked there. And it was. And so I parked, it was right in front of our church building. I parked there yesterday for 6 hours, the day before for 6 hours, that same spot, the same make, model, color. If you had asked me moments before, 1,000,000%, that dude is digging in my car.
Taking your stuff.
Taking my stuff. I was, like, the thing is, we can be 100% convinced of something being true, and we can be 100% wrong. And so you have all these denominations pre-programmed us to see something a certain way, and we all think we're right.
Right.
And somewhere there is a truth. And we have to be open. This is what I was trying to get to, is you were saying, well, can we be excited to go look at these new things? And a lot of denominations would tell you, put guards up, don't look at anything else. But we should be truth seekers, and we should try to find out the source, the primary source, is where it all started, and be able to admit when we're wrong. Like, okay, what if I would have just kept getting in that dude's car and saying it was my car?
That's right.
It's like, that was my car over there. So to finish the story, by the way, I apologize sincerely. Met a guy, he didn't know Spanish. I mean, he didn't know English. That's why I look so guilty, because this burly guy walks up to him and is like saying something, and right behind him, like looking, intruding in his space because it was his car, but I thought it was my car, so I thought I was in my space. You know,
somebody just happened to watch the interaction from afar.
Yeah,
that's so fun.
And so I'm like, and my son also thought it was our car, and even looking in it, and even when I opened the back door to get in, it had car seats, looked just like our car, everything. It was dark, it was in night, but it, like, until Chantel said that, I thought it was my car. And then that to say that his friend came up and he's like, oh, is that your car? It's the same year. And he spoke English, and I was like, I am so sorry. And I gave them both big hugs, and they're really good about it and happy. And I mean, I wasn't angrily saying anything.
Yeah.
But it was scary to that guy probably. And that's why he looked guilty, is because he was like, what is this guy saying? He's on my grill, and then he's trying to open my car door.
That's terrible.
So it looked like he was guilty from stealing something, but it was just, but that's how we can be deceived. We can really think something's true and it be a lie. And so if you really want to know if it's the truth, we have to keep working hard to find the truth. Satan's biggest weapon, his best weapon, it's the lie the greatest lie is the lie that lies closest to the truth. So he takes the truth and he twists it just enough, and if he can get someone who thinks they're a believer and thinks they're right with God but he's the enemy of God. He's on Satan's side, but he's never going to try to get right with God because he thinks he's right with God.
Right.
And so Satan wants all of us. Satan, I think, would rather have a bunch of people. I'm not sure which one's worse, knowing you're the enemy of God and choosing to be the enemy of God, or because then if you choose, you're the enemy, if you have a choice to change and be on the right side. But if you think you're on the right side, but you're on the wrong side, you don't even know you need to switch teams. And so Satan has helped these denominations become what they are, and be disobedient and say you can't please the Lord. Right. And so, like, if you have any thought that the Bible actually might mean what it says, and Jesus might actually want us to do what he's saying, it's our responsibility to seek first the kingdom and dig these things out and try to figure out these matters and see what was handed down. Why does the Bible say that the faith was once for all delivered to the saints that we're supposed to be earnestly contending for? Right. What is it that we're supposed to contend for? It wasn't what our parents handed down to us. It was what the apostles handed down to the next generation. What was handed to our parents has what's the probability of, if there's 44,000 denominations, I bet some of them are in line with God and walking with the Lord, but like, what's our chances of being in the right one?
And I think it's really important to communicate. If people didn't catch it, that I think that that the book of life has people's names written across wide swaths of these 100%. There's not I think sometimes we're in danger of this, like there's only one way and everybody else is off of it. But I'll throw in a few things that.
Yeah, and I said that last time. So this is take 2 of the podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
And the last time I did say, I believe there's faithful, devout Christians in all these different denominations. But one of the things that I've discovered is that there are churches that don't have divorce in their marriage. There are churches that don't have people on drugs and aren't looking at pornography, or if there are some that happen, they're fighting against it tooth and nail,
right?
And they're making big decisions to stay off media or to minimize it and to not scroll, and things that pull us. What was that quote last time you said about the evil? From evil or something.
The highway of the upright is to flee from evil. It's a proverb.
Yeah. There's churches that are doing that, and there's people doing that, and then anyway, yes, I do believe that, but I wouldn't want to be a part of something that the chances of my children going off into the world or getting divorced is 50-50 chance.
That's right.
I would rather be with a brotherhood that, strives to obey Christ and everything.
Great. I was just, a couple of things you said made me think about these aren't my thoughts, but when we have all our students take a statistics course here, and I actually think it's really interesting. There's a guy that comes and gives a guest lecture. His name's Byron Smucker, and he has a PhD in statistics. He's really, really, really sharp, and he comes and talks about statistics and faith, and it's actually shocking. A lot of people haven't heard faith talked about in statistical terms.
Yeah.
And he basically lays out this thesis that, like, hey, there's a difference between confidence and certainty, and statistics is not about certainty, it's about confidence.
Yeah.
And I think allowing that to enter into your faith is actually really freeing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people have been raised to think that, hey, if you're not certain, then that's a problem. Like, you're not allowed to have any doubts. But very few things in life can we operate in certainties. And as soon as you do, I think that's a problem. So I always, after this lecture, we always make some jokes that if you ever hear anybody say, I'm 100% certain that X, Y, or Z, you hear politicians say it, you hear different people, I would say, just write them off. Like, you can't be on so many things, but it's actually engaging with your confidence, where I think the early church, the more you read of them, your confidence levels towards what the scriptures mean, I think, start to change more towards the literal and less away from the contextual sort of cultural arguments that XYZ is this for us. And then you mentioned John Chrysostom as like a really good place to start. And people, where can you find?
So the easiest, and there are free things out there, but they're not normally all compiled and searchable. I mean, if you're tech savvy, you can search them, but the Kindle versions, there's 2 or 3 that are like $1.99. I don't know the exact cost now, but they'll have the whole pre and post Nicene sets together, and you can they're just really, it's a little hard because there are a lot of writings that actually there's spurious writings in them, and they'll normally say they're spurious, so you can't just like read everything in it. You have to pay attention to what the beginning says, because it could just be some writing that was written like thousands of years later under Ignatius, and it might not be his writing at all, and not thousands of years, but way later. So you have to pay attention to the beginnings. But yeah, the Kindle, and Kindle's the easiest way to get your feet wet.
Yeah, that's great. And it's pretty cheap too. So anyone curious. So the other thing I thought would be really interesting to talk about is just like content and media. So content creation, digital media, and how you think about guiding our interaction with that. I make a lot of jokes, and that on the one hand, I get up behind a pulpit or on stage and warn people about the effects of media consumption. And then on the other end, there seems to be this incredible opportunity with the internet, creating sermons, creating content, and letting it spread and getting to the right people. And I actually think this is probably going to be something we should constantly be thinking about. But how do you think about sort of the balance between caution and then the versus opportunity with the power of the internet, creating videos, social media, the whole ecosystem, and YouTube? I know there's a lot of different ways to take that conversation.
Yeah, technology isn't in itself evil, but we can use it for good or for evil, or we can not use it, and it's okay. There's plenty of godly Amish that aren't going to touch it, and there's times in our lives where, we need to step away from it completely, or, focus on something else. And if we can't handle it, or if we can't control ourselves, or if we're always looking for the next dopamine hit and we find ourselves addicted to something. But it is the way that Christ has used these tools, from different things like the Followers of the Way and Kingdom Fellowship Weekend, that made me realize there's communities of these people living out the simple teachings of the Bible. The Bible is in their most literal interpretation, and that I wasn't alone. I think that, in my opinion, we wouldn't have continued. We might have, but I don't think we would have continued if we didn't have a community of people that also believe the same thing. We'd just be these lone rangers and feel like we're ostracizing ourselves for no reason. Like, why not just join the faith only? We can't please the lawyers, and why wear the head covering, and why does any of this matter? I think that knowing that there was probably millions of people doing this, if not more, I don't even know. With these videos that are on YouTube, I have a feeling it saved our lives. That God could have used something else. So I have a passion to put it online and to try to bring other people out of the worldly churches and out of disobedience, and to trying to live worthy of the gospel of Christ. And, but I do think that's the exact words we should use, as a balance. If we find we can't control ourselves, it's better to cut off the hand.
Radical amputation.
Yeah. But if we, in this ministry, that we need to be, when we go online, we need to make sure we're not just aimlessly scrolling, have a purpose. I mean, you can look up stuff that's the new tech or things that aren't necessarily godly, but know what you're going to look for. Don't just waste time to look for dopamine hits, and have accountability partners, have the apps on your phone that tell people, have open discussion with discipleship groups.
Yeah, I think a weekly conversation with people you trust is a huge, weird joke. The question that our groups, my church uses, and then something sourcing, have you looked at anything foolish, immoral, and pornographic?
Yeah.
In the last week. I think it's that it's that important that we need to review it that often with each other. But anyway,
maybe I won't be able to say this, so I'm gonna say I can cut. One of our things that we say, would you watch it with Deborah Brousseau?
That's a godly woman in your church.
Yes. No, we watch it. It actually changed after that to, would you watch it with other brothers in the church? Because we found that there are foolish things that aren't ungodly, and yes, God, there's funny things of, and are we wasting time? Some of those questions, what's the reason behind it? But would we share it with our brothers and sisters? If not, then we probably shouldn't be digging into any of that.
So I know this is funny for me, but what I've even found is, even when you have peer level brothers, that sometimes you kind of give each other passes, because it's like you're all struggling with the same thing, so you start to give passes. I always, in my context, if I'm like, would I watch this in front of somebody that is viewing me as like a leader in some capacity.
Yeah.
Like that, and even my kids, like, or your grandma or something like that. But I think that's like a really interesting perspective. Like if there's some new to the faith, would you want them to catch you watching this thing when you're trying to disciple them into the ways of Christ? And so basically, I just want to hear your thoughts. You think it's probably worth people paying attention to creating good content, leveraging what we can leverage.
I absolutely think that if the gospel of the kingdom is going to get out to everybody, that, yeah, we can do it. We can go knock on doors. Like, the Jehovah's Witnesses did a really good job, and
you're still doing a good job.
If you're going to be an elder, you got to knock on 150 doors. But so we put out, I was looking into the statistics. I don't remember what they were, of how many people actually become a Jehovah's Witness. They knock on a ton of doors to get one convert. And last month, and it was mostly because of shorts, but we had like around 50,000. There's a few days that it was 50,000 views in 1 month, 28 days. That's how YouTube splits it up for the Sound Faith channel. And like the percentages of a convert are really low, but it's like knocking on their doors. Like we're knocking on their doors, and really easily, like we have the ability to infiltrate their homes, and like we can choose to not use it, but I feel like it's irresponsible that we have the ability to go into, and it was like all these countries, like the Netherlands, there's a list of all these countries of people watching it. And I'm thinking, how hard it would have been to go to those countries. And then we're getting people like saying that their lives have been changed, and people moving in because they watched YouTube. And to me, it's not anything on YouTube.
Yeah.
To me, it's totally worth it, but we have to be responsible. We're not condoning just watching anything that's on YouTube or any. And Facebook is one thing that I do want to warn about. Absolutely. I don't think you should watch video content on Facebook. I really think their algorithm they don't care if you don't want to watch something. Like on YouTube, you can say not interested and you report it as sexual. And I make it a habit to report anything that's like, the world wouldn't think what the things I report is sexual. Like most everybody would think that's ridiculous that I'm saying it's sexual, but it's obviously sexually appealing. You hit not interested, report, and then not interested. And then in a very short time, you don't get these recommendations or whatever you call them. You don't get things in your feed that are bad. I mean, I'm not saying everything, but not sexually stimulating at all. And every once in a while, you might get something, but you just get in a habit of reporting it and saying not interested. If in the future that's not the case, I think I would possibly get off the platform altogether and try to figure out some other way. But Facebook, you can say not interested, or whatever it is, you can report it, but it doesn't matter. They just keep feeding it. And so it's like, you don't get on. In my opinion, I don't think the algorithm itself is evil, but whoever made it doesn't care about morals or what people want to not see. Right. Is that a way to say that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I think I agree with you. And I do agree with you. That's why I make content, and part of me is trying to spread awareness of a ministry that I'm doing with the college and things like that as well. But I just think a lot of us should be cautious. I just think there's a lot of caution around it. And I say that in my own humble failings on thinking I'm stronger than I am with like not being allured by things that are foolish, immoral, and pornographic. Like there's a constant allure out there. And I think there's power there, but technology untethered from morals produces terrible consequences, and we just have to be careful with that.
What is foolish?
Well, you tell me. No, I mean, I think foolish.
So I watch editing videos, right?
Yeah.
How to like make something in the background look like it's in the foreground, and this guy, I forget his name, does all this like almost magic tricks with editing. Like I still can't figure out how he does it, but it's half the time funny or foolish, and like
I think if you're using content for a skill you're trying to acquire, it would be hard for me to put that in the foolish category. But I think like just a
No,
lot of
it's always been a thing that it's fun to put out there because I don't know.
it feels like there's a lot of comedy out there that's very prevalent that runs it. I think it makes you kind of feel good and you laugh, but I think a lot of comedy can be foolish. There's the coarse joking message that I think a lot of the foolish stuff falls in sort of that category of content. But I would even say, politically that there's, this maybe I'm so attracted to political banter that just because I think it's interesting and intriguing, I would put some of that stuff in the foolish category. Endless shows about movie shows and consumer digest stuff. I think a lot of us could end up watching reviews on a product we're looking for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
But I think each of us has to really identify a lot of that for ourselves. But I think there are pretty black and white foolish things to stay away from.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it's just hard. The word seems broad to me. Like something can be like my brothers in Christ will do something maybe foolish, but I don't think it was wrong. Like, and I don't mean in a silly way.
No, not really.
Like, that was funny. And
we talk about this verse about that Paul says, cast off the sin and the weight. And I think even Paul identifies things that are sinful and then things that are just weights. And I think there is a category of things that maybe not might be in the sinful category, but
they're not.
You
don't have worth.
You can fill in the blank. Like doing X made me a better person. And I think those are the category of weights that they're not prohibited, so to speak, but we would be better people at the end of our lives if we learn how to let go.
Yeah, that's a good way to talk about it.
I don't know.
It's just whenever it's next to pornographic, it's like, okay, well, just watching the boy stick his tongue to an ice pole was foolish, but it wasn't in the category over there. They're right next to each other in this question because we have the same question. So
I'm not gonna. I could try to get into my own like theory of what's foolish for myself, but I think at the end of the day, the Holy Spirit gives us a conscience.
Yeah,
and if people have an instinct to confess that you watch something foolish, that's where I'm always like, I think you should jump on that and be like, if you're gonna confess it, then don't try not to do it again, right?
Well, I only confess a lot of the things because there's so many things that in all day life, not just on videos, that you go anywhere and hang out for a minute.
Yeah,
something will be foolish in front of you, and it's like, but it wasn't like I wouldn't
sinned
or anything.
Yeah, I think it's like, for me, if anyway,
that's why they changed the thing to would you watch it with certain people? It's hilarious.
That makes sense. It's actually a good way to think about it. Think about the person you value most, and then frame that as your reflective question.
Yeah.
I know we went all over the place.
I'm sorry.
No, this is great. Is there anything else you want to cover? We're kind of approaching the hour here, and it's always helpful to sort of wrap it up.
No, I'm really thankful for the things that you're working on and your service here. And I don't have a whole lot extra. I've probably said stuff in the other one that we could have said, but
yeah. In our first recording, and your work again, Sound Faith is sort of
the historic faith are kind of like the biggest things we do, and then All Nations Bible Translators and Strength to Strength. If you haven't seen them, they're great. And
so Sound Faith is a YouTube channel. You can find it on YouTube.
Yep.
And the Historic Faith is a website.
Yep.
I can't remember if there's a YouTube.
No, there is a YouTube channel, but it's not.
You have to go on the website to find the content.
The website. And then there's the Strength to Strength books is a really good one with a lot of really edifying books. And Scroll Publishing, and some good things out there. And Saddler Podcast.
Great. well, hopefully the Sattler process gets better over time. But hey, Daniel, thanks for being here with us, and God bless you.